A wealthy black man who operated under the radar as a frequent shopper had a habit of visiting one of his luxury stores regularly. The owner of the boutique, however, never recognized him and, without hesitation, made racist remarks about black people. The next day, the owner was stunned when he called the corporate office and found himself face to face with the very man he had belittled, John Bennett. On a crisp autumn day in New York, John blended into the bustling crowd on Fifth Avenue. The cool breeze ruffled the collar of his everyday black coat, and his baseball cap was pulled low, obscuring his face. He gazed out at the sea of pedestrians through the large glass windows of a posh store. The building, towering above the streets, exuded sleek, modern elegance. Its entrance was crowned with golden letters, and the windows revealed a carefully curated display of designer bags swaying as shoppers passed by. Taking a deep breath, John approached the heavy glass door, pushing it open with ease, the soft chime announcing his arrival. Inside, the store was a world of opulence. Marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, velvet upholstered seats sat in strategic spots, and exquisite high-end jewelry was meticulously arranged on polished display tables. The air was filled with the scent of luxurious perfumes, blending seamlessly with the gentle jazz music playing in the background. John had designed this space to be a welcoming one-ear place where luxury and comfort met. But today, as he entered wearing dark jeans, plain black sneakers, and a simple jacket, he felt like an outsider. He was far removed from the usual clientele, and that was exactly what he wanted. He sought to observe how people were treated, not influenced by his title or status. He had done this at other locations before, but today was different. Today, he was back in his hometown, checking in on one of the stores he took great pride in. John wandered through the showroom, admiring the fine craftsmanship of the luxury watches displayed in one of the cabinets. Though he had played a significant role in selecting these collections, today he was just another shopper, observing quietly from the sidelines. It was then that his eyes fell on Richard Coleman, the franchise owner of the store, who was standing near the cashier. Richard, in his early 50s, with thinning silver hair and a sharp suit that seemed a bit too tight around the middle, was engaged in conversation with a well-dressed woman. His deep voice was calm and polite, and the practiced smile on his face was one John knew all too well. As John approached the watch display, Richard's gaze briefly swept over him. His smile faltered, his expression shifting into a subtle frown. John played it cool, pretending not to notice as he picked up a sleek silver watch with a leather band. He turned it in his hands, admiring the weight and precision of the piece. "Excuse me," John said, keeping his voice soft. "Could you tell me more about this watch?" Richard hesitated for a moment before walking over. His eyes scanned John, taking in the casual attire. The baseball cafe's demeanor immediately shifted, as if dismissing John as a serious customer. "This is one of our limited edition models," Richard said in a clipped tone, his voice almost condescending. "It's quite unique, though it might not be exactly what you're looking for." John kept his smile in place, undeterred. "Oh, why not?" he asked casually. Richard's gaze narrowed, the smile on his face tightening. "It's a very high-end piece. Perhaps you'd be more interested in something more accessible." John's irritation stirred. He knew Richard had no idea who he was, but the assumptions hidden behind his words were all too clear. "Actually, I like high-end things," John replied, his voice calm and steady. "What makes this one so special?" Richard sighed, as though he were being forced to entertain a tedious task. "It's made by one of the finest watchmakers in Switzerland. The materials are top-notch, and the craftsmanship is unparalleled. It's a true collector's item. There are only a handful in the world." John nodded thoughtfully, admiring the watch in his hands. "Sounds impressive. How much is it?" Richard paused, his eyes scanning John's face as if searching for any clue that might reveal whether John could afford such an extravagant purchase. After a brief moment, Richard replied, "It's priced at $122,000. At last he offered a suggestion, somewhat reluctant, but still with a hint of a smile. "As I said, we do have other options that may be more in line with your budget." John's smile lingered, but beneath it, a familiar frustration simmered. He gently placed the watch back on the display shelf, casting a fleeting glance at Richard. "If I were to purchase this," John began, his tone measured. Richard's eyes flashed with irritation. "I'd need to see proof of payment first. We don't just let anyone walk out with our finest pieces," he stated flatly. John's expression remained unchanged, though his patience was clearly thinning. "I understand it's store policy to confirm a customer's payment ability before proceeding with a sale," John replied, his tone neutral. Richard, however, grew defensive. "It's not about questioning. It's about safeguarding the integrity of our brand. We can't just allow anyone to handle our merchandise." He snapped, his words sharp as he stood behind the counter. John stared at him for a moment, then turned, nodding in acknowledgement of Richard's position. "I see," John murmured, turning away from the display case. He walked toward the door, feeling the weight of Richard's gaze following him. The silent judgment hung in the air like a cloud. John pushed the door open, stepping out into the cool city air. His mind churned, replaying the conversation. The store, which had once felt like a polished sanctuary, now felt sterile, disconnected. What had begun as a simple visit now stirred a sense of deep frustration within him. He stood on the sidewalk, blending into the flow of pedestrians. John Bennett knew this visit wasn't over. He had seen enough to know that action was required. John paused outside the store, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. His purpose had been simple, to observe, but what he had witnessed left him fuming with anger. With a deep breath, he turned back to the glass door and entered the store once again, determined to see if this was just an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. The little bell above the door rang once more as John stepped inside. This time he didn't bother to look around. His eyes were fixed on Richard, still standing near the counter, engrossed in his phone. Richard glanced up as John approached, narrowing his eyes. The earlier air of superiority was unmistakable, not accidental. John recognized it as a mixture of condescension and irritation. Taking another deep breath, John reminded himself of his purpose as he approached a display of custom-designed coats. His fingers brushed over the soft fabric of a dark, elegantly tailored coat, perfect for fall. He picked it up, holding it out to examine it more closely. "Excuse me, Richard," John said calmly, his tone polite but firm. "Could you tell me more about this coat?" Richard slowly put his phone away, his eyes briefly flicking from the coat to John's face. He hesitated for a moment, then forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's one of our premium items," Richard explained, his voice clipped. "Handcrafted in Italy, part of our latest collection, very exclusive." John nodded, examining the coat. It was beautiful, crafted with an elegance that spoke of luxury. Richard's smile tightened as he added, "It's priced at $2,500. These are for our high-end clients. We usually don't let just anyone touch such merchandise." John raised an eyebrow, his voice still neutral. "I see. So you keep some items out of reach of your regular customers?" Richard's face stiffened, his demeanor becoming even more rigid. "Our regular clients know they can afford these, and they know what they're paying for," he replied, his tone dismissive. "We cater to a specific group here, those who appreciate quality and can afford it." John placed the coat back on its hanger, feeling a surge of disappointment. He took a moment to steady himself before speaking again, forcing his voice to remain even. "I appreciate the quality," he said, his words deliberate, "and I think I might be interested in this coat." Richard's eyes flashed with skepticism, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice as if trying to make the conversation more private. "I don't mean to offend you, but perhaps you should consider some of our more reasonable options," Richard suggested, his tone still laced with that same air of superiority. "There's no point in wasting time on items that are clearly out of your price range." John's patience snapped. He met Richard's gaze head-on, no longer hiding his frustration. It was clear now that this wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a pattern of condescension. John knew he had to act, but what that action would be, he had yet to decide. John's voice was firm yet controlled. "You have no idea what my boundaries are," he replied. "And if you're assuming based on my appearance, that's not good business practice." Richard's expression tightened, his features growing more intense. He looked John up and down, seemingly sizing him up all over again. "We have an image to maintain," he said, his tone slow, as if explaining something to someone who didn't understand the rules. "We can't just let anyone come in and handle our most valuable pieces. It's about brand preservation." John's glare burned with rising frustration. His eyes never left Richard's. He wasn't impressed by the assumption that someone like him could be dismissed so easily. "Judging people based on their looks doesn't build loyalty or respect," John countered, his voice rising slightly, a touch of anger seeping through. Richard, unruffled, crossed his arms, the stance one of unshakable confidence. "Our customers appreciate exclusivity," he stated matter-of-factly. "They don't want just anyone touching the merchandise. It's the experience, the environment, it's all part of what sets us apart." John exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. He didn't break the stare as he let Richard's words sink in. "You really think treating potential clients with disrespect is part of the experience?" he asked, his voice colder now. Richard shrugged nonchalantly, a smirk forming on his lips. "Look at me. I know my customers better than you do. It's my job to protect the store's integrity." John didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the store, taking in the pristine displays and the other customers browsing carefully curated merchandise. He noticed the tense atmosphere between them and, after a brief pause, he turned back to Richard. "Thanks for your time," John said curtly, his voice now more composed. "I think I've seen everything I need to." Without waiting for an answer, he turned on his heel and walked toward the door. The soft chime of the bell rang as he stepped outside, the cool city air welcoming him. This time, John didn't linger on the sidewalk. He moved briskly down the street, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had just experienced. It was unacceptable both as a businessman and as someone who valued treating others with respect. He had seen the reality of how things were run in that store, and it had only fueled his anger. John clenched his jaw as he thought back to Richard's condescending tone, his dismissive attitude. This wasn't just about a jacket or a watch, it was about the values John had built his company on. Values that had clearly been disrespected in that store. As he walked, his frustration morphed into determination. He knew what he needed to do. Today, he'd been treated like just another customer, judged by his appearance, discarded without a second thought. Tomorrow, he wouldn't return as John Bennett, the customer, but as John Bennett, the owner, and things were about to change. That night, John replayed the interactions in his mind, each word fueling his resolve. Richard's dismissive behavior had crystallized into a clear plan. John would return. He wanted to see if Richard's behavior went beyond just his treatment of John, if Richard treated others the same way. If he did, John would uncover it. The next morning, John dressed in his usual casual attire, sneakers, jeans, and the same black jacket, and made his way back to the store. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, signaling his arrival. The store was quieter than it had been the previous day, with fewer customers browsing the displays. John headed straight for the jewelry section. His gaze immediately fell on a display case holding a series of diamond bracelets and necklaces, each sparkling softly in the gentle lighting. The price tags were discreetly hidden, but John didn't need to see them to know the value of what was on display. As he studied a particularly intricate bracelet, his eyes caught movement at the back of the store. Richard was standing near the far end, engaged in a conversation with a young woman, Sarah Moore, the assistant manager. Her anxious expression contrasted sharply with Richard's calm demeanor. She nodded as Richard spoke, her hands fidgeting nervously with a file folder. John leaned in slightly to listen, his attention sharp. He caught a snippet of their conversation. Richard's voice was low but firm. "We have standards to maintain, and we can't just let anyone in here. I don't care if he's a potential client or not." Sarah glanced over at John, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, and John could sense her unease. But Richard didn't seem to notice, his words cutting through the air, dripping with the same arrogance John had felt earlier. Her face bore a mix of concern and empathy as she briefly met John's gaze, before quickly turning away. John pretended not to notice and shifted his attention to the jewelry display. He already knew Richard was keeping a close eye on him, silently instructing his staff to be cautious. The tension in the air only solidified John's resolve to confront Richard once more. This time, he intended to uncover just how far Richard's bias stretched. John reached for a diamond necklace, signaling to a young sales associate who had been eyeing him cautiously. She approached with a polite, professional smile, though her unease was palpable. "Good morning, sir," she greeted, her tone warm but cautious. John returned her smile, trying to ease the tension. "Could you tell me more about this necklace?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at Richard, who was watching them closely, before she spoke in a low voice. "This is one of our signature pieces. It's crafted with the finest diamonds, set in platinum. It's priced at $15,000. John nodded appreciatively. "It's beautiful," he remarked. "May I take a closer look?" Before the associate could respond, Richard's voice cut through the moment, stern and commanding. "Is there a problem here?" He directed the question to the associate, not John. "No problem at all," John responded, his voice calm and steady. "I'm just asking about the necklace. I'd like to examine it more closely." Richard's eyes narrowed with irritation, his tone sharp. "I don't think that's necessary," he said with a condescending edge. "As I've mentioned before, there are other items that may be more suited to your taste." John held his ground, not flinching. "I'm interested in this one," he said firmly. "I want to see how it looks up close." Richard crossed his arms, his posture exuding a sense of superiority. "Our policy is to reserve pieces like this for serious buyers only," he said with an air of finality. I can't have just anyone trying on our most valuable items." John's calm facade began to slip as a surge of frustration crept in. "And what makes you think I'm not serious?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of his disbelief. Richard scanned John from head to toe, the look of disdain unmistakable. "Experience," he replied coldly. "I know who can afford my merchandise. I protect the integrity of this store and its brand. We have a reputation to uphold." John felt the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his tone even. "And you uphold that reputation by judging people based on their appearance, by refusing to serve someone because you think they don't belong here." Richard's expression didn't change. "This isn't personal, it's business. Our customers expect a certain level of exclusivity. I can't waste time on those who aren't serious about purchasing." John took a step closer, lowering his voice. "How many serious buyers have you turned away because you made assumptions about them? How many people have you disrespected because you decided they didn't fit your idea of the right customer?" Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "I run this store as I see fit," he shot back, his voice razor-sharp. "I don't owe you an explanation." John didn't back down. Beneath his composed exterior, the anger simmered, but he kept his voice low. "You may not owe me an explanation, but you'll have to answer to someone. The way you treat people, it's not just bad for business, it's wrong." For a brief moment, Richard's icy demeanor faltered, a flash of uncertainty passing through his eyes before he masked it with a sneer. "If you don't like how things are run here, feel free to leave," he said dismissively. "There are plenty of other stores that might cater to your preferences." John took a deep breath, stepping back. He glanced over at Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with a concerned expression. "Thank you for your time," John said coldly to Richard. "I'll be sure to let the right people know how you run your store." With that, John turned on his heel and made his way toward the door. The chime of the bell seemed louder than ever as he stepped back onto the bustling street. John knew exactly what he needed to do next. He had seen enough to understand that Richard's behavior wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a mindset that needed to be addressed. The moment his resolve solidified, he once hoped for a different outcome, but now there was no room for doubt. Change was necessary, and it had to begin immediately. John spent the entire night preparing for the tasks awaiting him the following morning. He didn't return to the lavish store. Instead, he made his way directly to his company's headquarters, a sleek glass building in Midtown. The atmosphere inside Manhattan was calm and efficient, with soft ringing phones and purposeful staff moving through the halls. John entered the executive meeting room, a vast space featuring a long conference table and polished floors. The ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. He sat at the head of the table, maintaining a composed yet determined expression. He had arranged for Richard Coleman to meet with him here under the pretense of discussing the store's performance and future objectives. John knew this would ensure Richard's attendance. Lisa, his assistant, stood by the door, waiting for Richard to arrive promptly. Richard entered with his usual confident air, as though it wrapped around him like a cloak. His sharp suit contrasted with the curiosity mixed with mild irritation on his face. Clearly, he assumed he had been summoned for a routine checkup, perhaps even to receive praise for his work at the store. But when his gaze fell upon John sitting at the table, his steps faltered for a moment. His eyes widened in surprise. He quickly glanced at Lisa, then back at John, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. There was an unmistakable flicker of confusion on his face. John remained silent for a while, allowing Richard to take in the scene. After a moment, he spoke with calm authority. "Sit down, Richard," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Richard hesitated, his confusion palpable, but eventually he took a seat. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," he said cautiously, as though treading carefully. "I didn't expect to meet you here. Is everything all right?" John leaned slightly forward, his eyes locking onto Richard's with unwavering determination. "No, Richard, everything is not all right. I'm here to discuss some serious concerns regarding your behavior at the store." Richard's expression shifted to one of confusion, followed by an attempt to regain his usual confident demeanor. "But I've always managed the store well. I've pushed sales and maintained a strong brand image. If there's an issue, I'm more than happy to address it." John's face remained unchanged. "Sales are not the problem here, Richard," he replied, his tone steady. "The problem is how you treat people. I visited your store yesterday, but you didn't recognize me. I came as an ordinary customer, dressed simply, yet I quickly noticed your reaction. I could see the fear in your face when you realized who I was. But let me continue before you speak." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. John pressed on. "I saw firsthand how you judged me based on my appearance. You made assumptions and denied me the level of service you provide to those you deem worthy. It's not just about how you treated meats, about how you treat everyone who doesn't fit your narrow view of who deserves respect." Richard swallowed hard, his discomfort growing. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't know it was you. If I had known—" John interrupted him sharply. "That's exactly the problem, Richard. You shouldn't need to know who someone is in order to treat them with basic human courtesy." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This company represents inclusion and respect. We've built our brand on the idea that luxury isn't just about exclusivity, it's about making everyone feel valued. You've turned my store into the opposite of what it was meant to be." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly out of his depth. "I was just trying to maintain the brand image to keep it exclusive and high-end. Our customers expect a certain atmosphere, a certain clientele." John's voice grew firmer. "Our customers expect quality products and respectful service, no matter how they look or what they wear. They deserve to be welcomed, not judged. Your behavior undermines everything that our brand stands for." Richard's face, once confident, now wore the mask of desperation. "Mr. Bennett, please, I can change." "I understand," Richard said, trying to steady himself, his voice tight with determination. "I'll do better. I'll follow any training you need." John shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. "It's too late for that, Richard. This isn't about training. Your attitude is the real issue. It goes deeper than skill sets about how you view people, and that's something I can no longer allow to continue." He paused, then delivered the news with quiet certainty. "Effective immediately, I'm terminating your franchise agreement. You're no longer responsible for that store." Richard's eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done for this company for years, you can't just throw me out like this?" John stood up, his posture calm yet unyielding. "I can, and I will. And let me be clear, your behavior won't just affect you, it affects the entire company. I won't let one person's prejudice tarnish everything we've built." He turned towards the door. "Security will escort you out. You'll be given instructions for the termination process and what happens next." Richard, standing now, faced John with a mix of fury and disbelief. "This is a huge mistake. I'm the best manager this company has. You'll regret this." John's voice remained even, unwavering. "No, Richard. The mistake was ever letting you get to a point where you could damage the company's core values. I won't apologize for making sure the stores I oversee are run by people who truly understand what our brand stands for." For a long moment, Richard glared at him, his anger seething. But then, as if realizing the futility of any further argument, he spun on his heel and stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. John watched him go, feeling a certain resolution settle over him. This wasn't just about firing Richard, it was about protecting the integrity of the company and ensuring that every customer was treated with respect. He turned to Lisa, who had been silently observing the entire exchange. "Make sure Richard is escorted out, and that the transition begins immediately." Lisa nodded. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. I'll handle it." John moved to the window, looking out over the city. The decision had been necessary, but he knew it was only the first step. There was much more to do to ensure that the stores under his brand upheld the values he believed in. Still, for now, he felt a sense of calm. The message was clear: respect and integrity would always come first. As he stood there, gazing out at the bustling streets of New York City, John reflected on the meeting with Richard. It had gone as expected, but there was no satisfaction in it. The decision to fire Richard had been essential, but it was just one piece of a much bigger issue. He turned from the window just as his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah Moore, the store manager assistant. She had agreed to meet him at headquarters to discuss the future of the store. John walked down the hall to the meeting room, where Sarah was already waiting. As he entered, she quickly rose, her expression a mix of concern and anticipation. Her brown hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a simple blouse and skirt. Her eyes reflected a blend of worry and hope. John smiled reassuringly. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I know these have been tense days," John continued, motioning for her to sit. She nodded, gripping her hands tightly before speaking. "Yes, Mr. Bennett? I've heard about what happened with Richard. The staff is talking, and they're worried about what's next for the store." John settled into his seat, looking at her with understanding. "I get it. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Richard's departure is necessary for the company's growth, but I know it leaves a lot of uncertainty behind. I want to make sure the store runs smoothly moving forward." Sarah gave a small nod, her expression serious. "I appreciate that, Mr. Bennett. I've always tried my best at the store, but working with Richard, it wasn't always easy." His way of doing things wasn't always in line with what I believe is best. John studied her carefully, impressed by her professionalism. I've seen how you handle yourself in the store, Sarah. Even in tough situations, you remain professional. That's why I want to offer you the position of interim manager. You know the staff, you know the store, and I believe you understand what our brand represents. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, followed by a visible sigh of relief. She hadn't expected this, and her gratitude was palpable as she sat up straighter. Sarah stood silently, her hands trembling slightly as she looked across the room at John. "You'll do it," John said with a reassuring smile. "You'll step up and help me ensure this store truly reflects the values we stand for. I need someone I can trust, to lead someone who won't make the same mistakes Richard made." His words resonated deeply with Sarah, and she nodded firmly, her voice soft but determined. "Yes, Mr. Bennett, I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this store what it should always have been," Sarah replied. She meant every word. "I've always believed in treating every customer with respect, no matter what they're purchasing. That's what we'll uphold." John's expression softened, a quiet satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. "Exactly what I want to hear," he said. "You'll have my full support, Sarah. Together, we'll make the necessary changes. I want you to feel empowered to address any issue, ensuring that every customer feels welcomed and valued." A deep breath of relief seemed to leave Sarah's chest as she nodded again. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice steady now. "I've always cared deeply about this store and its people. I just never felt I had the right to make a real difference." John smiled, his approval evident. "Now you do. Starting today, we'll focus on retraining the entire staff, putting emphasis on customer service. I want everyone who walks through those doors to feel like they belong, whether they're buying a $10,000 watch or just browsing." As they spoke, Sarah's confidence began to grow. "I can do this," she said, a new spark in her eyes. "I know the staff will respond well. They just need to know their efforts are supported, that they're working in a positive environment." Leaning back in his chair, John felt a rare sense of satisfaction, one he hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'll check in regularly, but I trust you to handle things, Sarah. Remember, the success of this store isn't just about profits, it's about building a community of respect and inclusivity." Sarah smiled, a look of determination settling on her face. "I won't let you down, Mr. Bennett. I'll make sure this store reflects the best of your brand." John stood, extending his hand toward her. "I know you will. Thank you for stepping up. I look forward to seeing the positive changes you'll bring." Their handshake was firm, Sarah's gaze filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," she said again. "I'm ready to make a real difference." As Sarah left the meeting room, John felt a sense of renewal wash over him, optimism rising like the tide. The past few days had been tough, but they had catalyzed the changes necessary to move forward. There was still much to be done, many more stores to visit, more managers to meet, but today was a step in the right direction. Back in his office, John gazed out at the city skyline, reflecting on the countless individuals who walked through the doors of his stores every day, each with their own story, their own hopes and dreams. He had built his brand with the belief that every person, no matter who they were, deserved to be treated with dignity, and today he had taken action to ensure that belief would endure. As the sun set behind the horizon, John felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a leader, responsible for using his position to create a positive impact. And with people like Sarah on board, he knew his stores would continue to thrive, not just as high-end boutiques, but as places where everyone felt welcomed. The next day, following Richard's termination, John wasted no time in implementing the necessary changes at the store. He scheduled a meeting with the staff to discuss the new direction, reassuring them that despite the sudden management shift, their jobs were secure and valued. He understood that stability and clear communication were key to transitioning the store into one that embodied his brand's values of inclusivity and respect. The meeting was held in a smaller, yet equally refined conference room at the company's headquarters, a space that felt worlds apart from the one where John had faced Richard. The staff's faces showed a mix of curiosity and concern as Sarah stood confidently at the front, a folder of documents in her hands. She felt more assured than she ever had before, knowing she was about to embark on something much bigger than herself. John rose, his voice calm and steady as he addressed the room. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "I know these past few days have been difficult, and I want to be clear about what's happening moving forward." Richard Coleman was no longer with the company, and his departure had been deemed necessary to realign the operations of our store with the values we stand for. The whisper of his exit lingered in the air, and John could sense the uncertainty that had crept into the eyes of his team. They were questioning what this meant for them and the future of the store, and as he made eye contact with many of them, he understood their concerns. He cleared his throat, offering a small, reassuring smile. "To make things clear, your positions are not at risk," he began. "We truly value the contributions each one of you makes, but there will be some changes moving forward. Our goal is to ensure that the store provides a welcoming environment for all customers, regardless of who they are or what they look like. It's not just about sales, it's about building relationships and treating everyone who walks through our doors with respect." At that moment, Sarah stepped forward. Her voice was steady, yet firm as she spoke. "As your interim manager, I'll be leading the efforts to make these changes. Our focus will be on customer service training, and I'll be working closely with each of you to ensure we all understand what's expected." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about growing together and improving how we interact with customers." James, a young associate, raised his hand, his face filled with curiosity. "What exactly will the training cover, and how long will it take? Will it be a long process?" John nodded toward Sarah, who explained, "The training will cover everything, from how to greet customers to handling sensitive situations. We'll also be conducting workshops on cultural awareness and inclusivity. The aim is to ensure everyone feels empowered to deliver the best service possible." She paused briefly before continuing. "We'll kick things off with a series of short sessions starting next week, followed by ongoing training throughout the year." James nodded in understanding, though still with a look of curiosity, while Lisa, a more seasoned employee, spoke up. "What happens if we witness behavior that doesn't align with these values? Should we report it directly to you, Sarah?" Before Sarah could respond, John interjected, "Yes, feel free to report any concerns directly to Sarah, or you can come to me. My door is always open. We take these matters seriously, and I want everyone to feel safe and supported when speaking up. We're building a culture of accountability and respect, and that starts with all of us." As the team nodded in agreement, John could feel the tension in the room beginning to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. They weren't just hearing about the changes, they were now part of the process, and that was a crucial step in building trust. "Are there any other questions?" John asked, scanning the room. Claire, a young cashier, raised her hand, her expression thoughtful. "What if a customer comes in with an attitude like Richard's? How do we handle situations where customers are rude or discriminatory?" Sarah smiled at the question, clearly prepared. "That's an excellent question, Claire. Part of our training will include conflict resolution techniques and de-escalation strategies. If you ever feel uncomfortable or if a customer behaves inappropriately, don't hesitate to call for a manager. We want you to feel empowered to handle situations professionally, but we're also here to support you." John nodded in agreement, adding, "Remember, you're not alone in this. We're a team, and we'll work together to make sure everyone, both staff and customers, feels respected." The staff seemed more at ease now, reassured by the clear plan and the support being offered. John himself felt a sense of relief. He knew these changes wouldn't solve every problem overnight, but they were a solid start. The store needed to be a place where everyone felt welcomed and valued, and that would require commitment from everyone involved. "Thank you all for your time," John concluded, his voice filled with conviction. "I believe in each of you, and I know we can turn this store into a shining example of what our brand stands for. Let's work together to make that a reality." As the meeting wrapped up, some of the employees gathered around Sarah, asking quick follow-up questions, eager to get more clarity on the upcoming changes. The others were settling back into their routines with a fresh sense of purpose. As John observed them, a wave of hope washed over him, knowing he had made the right decision in promoting Sarah. She exhibited the kind of leadership that Richard lacked, and her clear connection with the staff was evident, like the empty room around them. Turning to Sarah, John smiled and said, "You did an excellent job today." His voice was sincere. "The team respects you, and they're looking to you for guidance. Keep this momentum going." Sarah smiled back, a mixture of relief and resolve on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I won't let you down. I believe we can make a real difference here." John nodded, pleased. "I know you will. I'll check in regularly, but I trust you to handle things. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Sarah agreed, and John left the meeting room, his thoughts already shifting to the next steps. There were other stores to visit, more managers to meet, and problems to address. The situation with Richard was a sobering reminder that even the best intentions could be derailed by biases and poor leadership. As he walked through the halls of the headquarters, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. Confronting Richard would be challenging, but it was necessary. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating an environment where such behavior would not be tolerated. John was committed to building a company where respect, inclusivity, and integrity weren't just words on a mission statement. They were the principles that guided every decision, every action, and every interaction. He knew challenges lay ahead, but with leaders like Sarah on his side, he had faith they could make a lasting, positive impact. The atmosphere at the store had already begun to shift. The energy was lighter, the staff more engaged, and they were greeting customers with a warmth John hadn't seen before. His decision to appoint Sarah as interim manager had been the right one. She had organized training sessions effectively, and the team had responded positively. They were eager to build a more inclusive and respectful environment. True to his word, John had been checking in regularly. Today he decided to make an impromptu visit to see how things were progressing. As he entered the store, the familiar jingle of the doorbell rang out, and he was immediately greeted by James, a sales associate who had raised concerns during the staff meeting. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," James said, smiling warmly. "It's great to see you again." "Good morning, James," John replied, shaking his hand. "How's everything going?" James nodded enthusiastically. "The training sessions have been really helpful, and Sarah's done a fantastic job. The team feels more connected, and we're all on the same page about how we want to treat our customers." John smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Keep it up. I'm proud of how everyone's handling this transition." As John moved further into the store, he noticed the positive atmosphere. Customers were being welcomed with warmth, the staff was eager to help, and the overall vibe was one of positivity. It was a stark contrast to the atmosphere he had encountered on his first visit, when Richard was still in charge. John felt a sense of satisfaction, seeing his vision starting to take shape. He made his way to the back of the store, where Sarah was speaking with a customer. She looked up when she saw him and excused herself. "Mr. Bennett, it's a pleasure to see you," she said, her face lighting up with a radiant smile. "Likewise, Sarah," John replied. "I just wanted to stop by and see how things are going. You've done an excellent job." Sarah beamed with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. The team has been amazing. They've really embraced the changes, and we've been getting positive feedback from the customers. I think we're on the right track." John nodded, pleased. "I agree. You've turned things around here quickly, and I couldn't be happier with the progress. I'll continue to support you however I can." Their conversation was interrupted by the loud chime of the doorbell. John turned to see Richard Coleman standing in the entrance, his suit looking more disheveled than usual. Richard's face was filled with anxiety, his eyes scanning the store, landing on John and Sarah. John's expression hardened slightly. He hadn't expected to run into Richard here, especially not after their last encounter. Rewritten story, in American English. The last time Richard approached them, his steps were slower than usual, his posture less confident. He seemed more uncertain than Mr. Bennett. Richard began with a tone that was almost pleading. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I need to talk to you." John remained calm, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Sarah, who looked surprised but stayed silent, waiting. After a brief moment of silence, John turned back to Richard. "All right," he said coolly. "You've got a little time. What do you want to say?" Richard took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I came to apologize," he began. "Vaughn told me I was wrong, and I've had time to think it over. Now I see how terrible a mistake I made." He paused, trying to gather his thoughts. "I judged people unfairly. I let my own biases get in the way of my work. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. I really am." John listened quietly, his face still unreadable. Richard's eyes were filled with desperation, and his voice shook as he continued. "I've worked at this company for years. I care about the store's reputation. Please, give me another chance. Let me prove I can change. I can run the store the way you want it. I'll do whatever it takes." John stood still for a moment, letting Richard's words linger in the air, words that John had thought about endlessly in the past. He had witnessed Richard's abrupt treatment of customers based on their appearances, and now he saw the desperate desire for change in him, though it seemed more born of self-preservation than true remorse. "I appreciate your apology, Richard," John finally said, his tone steady but firm. "But this isn't just about one mistake. It's about a pattern of behavior, a way of thinking that you've demonstrated over the years. What I've seen in the store isn't just negligence, it's a deep-seated attitude that doesn't align with our values." Richard's face fell, his eyes filled with disappointment and despair. "Please, Mr. Bennett, he pleaded. I can learn. I can change. Just give me the store back and I'll prove it to you. John shook his head slowly, his decision final. The store's doing well under Sarah's leadership, and the staff has responded positively to the changes. I can't go back on that. My responsibility is to the company and to every customer who walks through those doors. Bringing you back would undo everything we've worked for. Richard's last hope flickered out as he looked at John, then turned his gaze to the ground, resigned. I understand, he murmured softly, almost to himself. I just thought maybe. John's voice softened slightly. Richard, I hope you see this as an opportunity to reflect and grow. This isn't about punishment. It's about ensuring the right people are in place to uphold our brand's values. I wish you the best in your future efforts, but you won't be taking this store back. Richard nodded, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Thank you for your time, Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, then without another word, turned and left the store, his footsteps slow and weighted with the gravity of his failure. John watched him go, feeling a pang of sympathy for the man, but knowing deep down that Richard's apology had come too late. The damage was done, and John could not afford to compromise the integrity of the brand for the sake of one person. The store had moved forward, and it had to keep moving in that direction. Sarah stood silently beside John, a sense of relief on her face. Thank you for not letting him come back, she said gently. I think the staff would have been worried if you had. John nodded. I made the decision based on what's best for the store and everyone working here. You've done a great job, Sarah. Keep up the good work. We're building something special, and I have full confidence in your leadership. Sarah smiled, her eyes glowing with a sense of achievement. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I won't let you down. John glanced around the store, watching the staff interact with the customers. Each positive, welcoming interaction was proof of the change they had embraced, and it filled John with pride and satisfaction. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but with strong leadership and a commitment to the company's core values, they could face whatever came next. As John left the store, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the brand he had worked so hard to create, and not just one that stood for luxury, but one that represented integrity, respect, and inclusivity. The right people, in the right roles. He trusted that the vision would continue to grow.
Hey there. Love a good story? The kind that pulls you in, keeps you on the edge of your seat, and leaves you wanting more? Well, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and tap the OYO notification bell so you never miss another epic story. Trust me, the best ones are still to come. New stories, more twists, bigger surprises. Be the first to hear them. You don't want to be the last to know. So go ahead, smash that button, and let's dive into the next great story together.